for today. So I'd like to take some few minutes to get you to know about our code of conduct so that we can have like a community where we think everybody is welcome. So yeah, uh, huh. So as a community, we have like a mission that we wanna achieve. That is like we welcome everybody and we support members in a safe environment where developers and cloud enthusiasts can share knowledge and grow their technical skills together. So this is our main mission as a community. And our code of conduct is we have three pillars. That is being inclusive, being respectful, and being professional. So by being inclusive, I mean, as I said earlier, we welcome all backgrounds, that is gender, ages, races, and religions into our learning space, aiming for them to learn and get more knowledge from us. To be respectful, I mean, it's like we have an online session. So like listen actively, provide space for others, and use kind communication in all interactions. And to be professional, I mean, focus on building bridges, no spam or personal attacks, protect member privacy. That is our code of conduct for the moment. So feel welcome in the room. If you have any questions, keep them safe until like the speaker asks for you to question him. And you can also feel free to ask the question whenever you feel you have not gotten any point, feel free to stop the speaker from continuing until you get the point. So yeah, for today's session that is titled Mastering Azure SQL Monitoring, Temi will take us through the session. He is a Microsoft Azure MVP. So help me welcome the speaker for today. That is Temi. Temi, are you around?
Yeah, I'm around. Hello, everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm up and audible.
Yeah,
Okay,
you're
yeah.
very audible.
Okay. So can I take it over from here if I share my screen?
Yeah, sure. Take it over from me. Let me stop
Okay,
sharing my screen.
okay, okay. So I'll say good evening, everyone. It's evening over here, actually. So, yeah, just sorry. Okay. Open PowerPoint. Mm, Um, so, come here. Presentation mode. Okay, sorry, I need to share the other window. That's this. Okay. Is my screen visible now? Hello, is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible. I
Okay,
can see it.
it's visible. Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're in the world. My name is Tim Money Andrew. I'm a Microsoft certified data engineer, that's a Microsoft Azure MVP in architecture. So I'll be working on through Azure SQL performance monitoring. So, sir, I'm looking here because my screen is over here, but my laptop is here, so I might be looking here once in a while. So I'll be talking about multiple pillars, right? I would say the Azure monitoring is all about being proactive rather than being reactive, right? So there's a word I use a lot, which is you're trying to be more proactive rather than being reactive. So proactive is before an issue occurs, you already have the solution to it, or you've already fixed it, or you've already mitigated it. Reactive is when the issue has occurred, then you now start solving the problem, right? So with Azure SQL database monitoring, it makes you to be more proactive rather than being reactive. And there's so multiple pillars you need to understand, like block, live blocking, deadlock, and the rest. So I'll kind of be a little bit fast because of time and everything, right? So if I say anything you don't understand, please you can always draw me back and I'll always explain. So I'm focusing more on the database part, right? So in any application you build today, there are multiple monitoring you can use, right? You can either monitor from the server part, from the VM part, or from the application part, right? There's some people that do that as a professional. They call them SRE, right? Site Reliance Engineer or something, right? When they monitor using tools like Grafana, Prometheus, or you can use things like Kibana, right? So monitoring is just all about being more proactive, right? So now, but for this our section tonight, I'll be focusing more on the database parts, especially for Azure database itself, right? So for database, there's some concurrence issue we tend to have, right? For some people that are very conversant with using SQL Server that's on-prem, or you're using cloud, or you're using Azure SQL database, you're using Azure managed instance, or you're using Azure for VM, or you're using normal SQL Server, right? So there's some logs or some issues or some concurrence issue we tend to face most times when we are working with it. So I'm going straight to the point. I'm not explaining, so we can do a lot and close for today. So part of the issues we tend to face when, for some of us that work with database a lot, is some concurrence problem. Concurrence basically means when multiple things are happening at the same time, right? Depending on your database capacity and the rest, right? So some of the blocks or some of the issues we tend to have are things like blocking. So blocking basically is one of the most common kind of issue we have in database, where two kind of queries or two kind of jobs are trying to run at the same time. So one is trying to do like a select statement, while the other is trying to do like an update, right? So most times, if these two kind of job happens, or two kind of processes happen at the same time, right? The database has the ability to pick which one it should run first. So most time it usually picks the select before it does the update, because normally update is actually changing the format, right, of the database itself, right? Why select is more like I'll do like a select statement. So most times you have scenarios like that. So it just basically picks one and lets the other wait, then it picks the other after that. Also have things like live lock. It basically interferes with, it's more like one of the processes that interferes with one another. Also have things like deadlocking, right? So these are like the major concurrence issue we have when we're dealing with database, right? But it's not something we need to like major upon too much for today. So another thing we tend to look at in Azure database is what we call metrics and logs, right? So what are the kind of metrics we tend to pick from the Azure database itself? We tend to look at things like CPU utilization and percentage. We tend to look at things like data and log IO, that's input and IO consumption, right? We tend to look at things like memory usage, DTU, connection and section, that's more like connection strings, storage utilities. So those are the kind of metrics we tend to look at. So for some people that are like, I call them like database administrator, right? One of the things you tend to look for your data to have like what you call like an high availability, that's an HA, right? To have a very high availability when you have like a very strong SLA, right? That okay, if this thing goes down, it comes up at a very high level, a very quick period of time, right? So part of the metrics we tend to look at are, I've mentioned it before, which are the CPU, the data, the memory, the DTU, the connection, and also the section itself, right? Those are the metrics we tend to look at in a database, right? You can actually look at more, but I'm just listing out some few ones which we're going to use as some examples for today. Also, too, for logs too are also the same thing, right? But the difference between metrics and logs are basically a numerical data with timestamp, right? Because you can actually do things like visualization from it, right? So types of the logs we tend to use in Azure SQL database. For some of us, I don't know if you've had the term or the resources called the log analytics, right? So for Azure, right, we have what called log analytics, which is used to perform things like aggregation, right? So for some of us that are like data engineers, cloud engineers, or solution architect, right? There's some tools we use in Azure like Data Explorer, like Stream Analytics, Data Analytics, Event Hub, and the rest, right? Those kind of data we use are called logs, and those logs, they usually have timestamp in that numerical data with timestamp, right? And you can build like graphs from it, you can do so many other things from it. And Microsoft actually created a programming language for this kind of scenario, which is called KQL. That's Crucial Query Language, right? I'll show you all of that. I'm just trying to like speed through the whole presentation and continue. Right, so it helps you like, it's just like KQL is just like a normal T-SQL, right? Which you can write query language like your normal SQL language, but KQL is a little bit different. It's used more for streaming data, right? Some of the to determine source of performance measures. So some of the things we tend to look at most times, and these are like the major four we look at in every database, right? You are trying to like monitor for performance. We look at query performance insight, right? So most people, like for me too, right? I work with a lot of SQL database, especially on-prem, right? I used to work a lot also too with Azure SQL database, but right now I work with a lot of on-premise database right now, and part of the ways I tend to check for optimization of my queries and everything, or optimization or try to understand what's happening on my database, I tend to use some query performance itself, some query metrics, right? So some of them are like so query performance insight, where you do things like DMV. So DMV, basically you're trying to like write some queries to check, oh, is there any lock in your data in what is running at the moment? What queries consuming the most capacity or CPU? What are the expensive queries, etc. Right? We also have some intelligent insights, which is also available in Azure SQL database. This one is actually an AI powered, which it gives you suggestion. Oh, you might need to add some index to your data, to some tables. I'm sorry, I think there's someone speaking. Is that someone asking a question or something? Hello? Oh, okay. Okay, that's fine. I thought someone was asking a question. Okay, just a minute. Okay. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. Why? Just a minute. Sorry. Why did I stop there? I thought someone was asking a question. Okay, I was watching something on YouTube actually. So another part is also the intelligence insight, right? So this one are actually AI powered, right? So where you tend to have like AI give you suggestion, or okay, you need to do some indexing in your data, you need to do some data compression or the rest, right? So these are some of the intelligent insight we tend to have in Azure SQL database itself. Also, other things we tend to have also is the Azure monitor or plus SQL insight. So this one is actually a little bit advanced, right? So these last two are kind of advanced, right? So these are what enterprise tend to use, right? So for the Azure monitor plus the SQL insights, you might need to have like three major resources. You need to have like Ubuntu installed on a dedicated you need to have like Azure VM Ubuntu OS, right? You need to have the log analytics, and you also need to have like a workspace, right? So for this, it's usually cost, you pay based on storage itself, right? But the advantage of this is it's used for like large scale. So you can have like multiple data source you are reading from real time, multiple servers, multiple database, either from Azure SQL database, a VM, that's a database on a VM, or Azure instance, managed instance, or the rest, right? And also the one that Microsoft released, which is what Microsoft is actually pushing for, is called the Data Watcher. For some of us that like have been using technology for some time now, right? Or they are very heavy on premise, you see some companies still use the SQL Insight, but note that Microsoft is actually, I think Microsoft have retired this already. That's the third one, right? And they're pushing more for Data Watcher. So the Data Watcher is more like a real-time data monitoring. It also supports languages like KQL, T-SQL, Power BI, Excel, and it's usually a pay-as-you-go service, right? You're doing pay-as-you-go. So going further into the SQL Insight, right? Some of the requirements you might need is you need a log analytics workspace, right? So log analytics is just basically so okay, let me give you a scenario. So log analytics is just like you're having like a log that reads report for you. One of the ways I've actually used it is in, so there's a time there's a time we were building like a project for a commercial bank back then, and we're trying to automate the entire processes using Azure, right? Some of the things we're trying to also check were in terms of pipeline failure. So we're using things like the normal Azure data stack, like Azure Synapse, ADF, Databricks, Azure functions and some other microservices like Logic App and the rest, right? And we're trying to like monitor, okay, if we're doing moving data from point A to point B, doing some transformation, pushing it data to the necessary APIs and everything, right? How long does it take, right? Also, we're trying to monitor for failures, or monitoring for success rate, right? So all of that, we now later built a dashboard around that. And all of that was done using log analytics, right? So log analytics, every resources in Azure has a way to generate logs, right? Either your Azure Data Factory, your Azure Synapse Analytics, your Azure functions, basically any resources you use that uses compute in Azure, right, has the ability to generate logs and data, right? So what you just use Azure Log Analytics to do is just connect to those different resources, right, and build a report from it. So now you can say, oh, take all the logs, all the activity that's happened in, I'm using ADF for instance now, Azure Data Factory. Take all the resources, do like 2 charts, both for success and both for failure. How to see them side by side. How many success do you have for the past 30 days? How many failures do you have for the past 30 days? Do a comparison, right? All that is usually done real time. And for you to achieve it real time, use things like log analytics. And log analytics works with a programming language called KQL, that's Custom Query Language, that's actually developed by Microsoft. For some of us that are very used to streaming technology like Kafka, we use KSQL, that's Kafka SQL query language, right? So as a consumer. So it's also the same thing. So all these technology are kind of the same, but just different use cases and the rest. So we have the log analytics workspace, which is to collect those data, store it. We also have our Azure VM, which is for monitoring. So in Azure VM, what we call like an agent, right? We have a monitoring agent. So I know there's a lot of buzzword in AI agents and stuff like that. So SQL Server, Azure VM also has agent, right? So you just install your agent inside a VM and it sends out the data, right? So I'm using Ubuntu 18.04, right? That's like the minimum version, but you can go for an higher version if you want to use something more higher, right? I know there's a lot of buzzword in AI agents. So agents are just basically orchestration that perform an action. I'll use that simple word for it, like orchestration that performs an action, right? If I give a context of AI agent, right? If I say I have an AI agent that gets me the weather data, gives me a good summary and sends it to me via WhatsApp or via Slack, right? Using like maybe ChatGPT LLM model, or using, I'm a little bit digressing just to give you a better context, but I know a lot of people are using a lot of AI agents, and it's just better to just like show you how agent works in both VM and also in the AI agent itself. So in summary, agents are just basically orchestrator that performs a particular action. Orchestrator is just more like a cron job, right? Cron, meaning it has a specific time to do a particular action. That's just it, right? So the same thing with AI agents, the same thing with this. The difference is that this agent here sends data. So the agent in a VM basically just sends data at a particular period of time. So it's maybe like a concurrent time, which it sends data at multiple intervals. Then you also need like a database, but the kind of database you're not using a basic tier, right? So there are different tier. We have like a standard and higher version, right? Or like an elastic tier, right? So for this, you're not going to use a basic tier, you're using something higher. This is the Microsoft documentation there. So these are some of the information that is being collected. And also if you see the flow process, like more like the architecture of how it looks end to end, right? So there are multiple layers, basically. There are basically 4 layers to the SQL insight itself, right? So if you say layer one is just basically the databases, right? What are the different databases? You can either have from Azure SQL database, you can have from Azure managed instance, you can have from SQL server on a VM, you can also have from on-prem, right? So for some of us that would tend to do a lot of migration, right? If I say, oh, well, we've always been on Azure, so we've always been on a SQL Server on-prem in a dedicated server, right? And we say, oh, we want to move to the cloud. Now we're trying to move to the cloud. We're trying to like move all our resources to the cloud. What are the things we need to do is you can actually do like a lift and move easily. If you have SQL Server, you can easily move it to Azure SQL Managed Instance. Basically, SQL Managed Instance is just basically SQL Server, but on cloud, right? The same functionality, the same properties, the same characteristics. SQL Server is just more Azure SQL Server on cloud, right? The only difference is that for SQL Server, you might have what we call like an agent job, right? For Azure SQL database, you have what called Elastic Job itself, right? That's just the major difference, but honestly, both of them are still the same thing, right? It's still they still work with the normal SQL and the rest. So the first layer is just the target, which is the SQL. The second layer is basically the monitoring. So the monitoring happens in what's the name now? The monitoring happens inside of a VM, and that VM is usually Ubuntu, and that VM has an agent installed inside of it, right? So for some of you that have done the Azure administrator exams, right? Like I've forgotten the name when I did it then. So you do a lot of things like backup, monitoring, and the rest, right? So when you're preparing for it, you have to install like an agent inside of a VM, and it's that agent that will be sending out data out to your log analytics or to your workspace, right? Real time, whether you backup data, monitoring data, and the rest. So the agent is just there pushing out data to a particular endpoint, and that endpoint is usually the log analytics. So it's pushing to log analytics. So log analytics, you have like what is going to receive like an endpoint. So you just push it as a JSON file, or you can do proofs or whatever file you want to do. So it goes to the log analytics. I remember log analytics is more like a aggregation, like a querying environment, right? So it goes to log analytics as a storage. You now use what we call KQL to query those data, right? And also note that there's always a retention period, right? So your data might not stay there forever in log analytics, right? You might say, okay, I want the data to be there for like 7 days or to be there for like a month. But remember, the longer it stays there, the more you pay, right? It's the same thing too with Kafka, right? Kafka is not I'm using Kafka for instance, right? Because I work a lot with Kafka and Azure, right? So Kafka is almost the same thing. So Kafka is not a storing place. You can keep data for there for some time, but there's always something called a retention policy. So how long do you want the retention to stay for, right? So the same thing too with log analytics. All of them are all streaming technology, right? So how long do you want the data to stay for? What you can also do is that as data gets to log analytics, you can actually use what you call like a stream analytics to also push the data to a dedicated storage, maybe like a ADLS, that's data lake gen 2, or maybe S3 bucket or whatever storage unit you want to push it into. So you can just have all the data stored incrementally or append the data in a particular directory or prefix in your storage account, right? So, but the data goes to log analytics workspace where you now start building your dashboard, your reports and everything right from there. But note there's always a retention policy. And lastly, you have your monitoring dashboard. So now from your log analytics, you can actually build your dashboard because log analytics is just like I'll give you it's just like Tableau or just like Power BI, right? In Power BI, you have like your sheets. Those sheets, when you add multiple sheets to it, you build like a dashboard, right? So now those different pages, is it called pages or called sheets? I don't have actually used Power BI actually. So they have like multiple, I know sheet is called in Excel, but in Power BI, I think it's called pages or so, right? But in your multiple pages, right, you can build a particular chart for one page, another chart for another page, another chart for another page. And when you now take all those reports together, merge it as one, you have like your dashboard, right? So that's the same thing too with how it works, right? So now in your log analytics, you ask, okay, how to get the number of failure, success or failure, right? Use like a T-SQL, write a query, generate a report, pin it to your dashboard, do for success, pin to your dashboard, do for failure, do for duration, pin it to your dashboard, then you get your report from there and you get what you want from there. You can have like a holistic view of everything. So this is one Microsoft is actually pushing for right now, which is called your database watcher, right? So it's more like a modern near real-time monitoring. And it's also a pay-as-you-go. And one of the cool feature about it, it supports not just only KQL, it supports KQL, it supports T-SQL, it supports Power BI, it also supports Excel for your end user, right? And to give you, I'm just trying to like speed through right now, to give you more like an overview of how everything is you can see that we have so now for what's the name now for what's the name database watcher, you can get data from multiple sources. So let me just check something. Apologies for that. I'm actually running something up. I've stopped it. Oh, I didn't stop it. Sorry. Okay, it's fine. Okay, so for your database watcher, you can have data coming from multiple sources. So now you can see that this is our target SQL database, right? You can have data coming from your logical server. That's different database. You can also have like an elastic pool server, but this is actually more expensive. So most times if you're using elastic pool, you know that you're doing a lot of real-time processing and the rest, right? Your logical server, multiple database, your managed instance. Remember, I said managed instance is just like SQL Server, but on Azure. You can also have like your HA replica. So HA replica stands for high availability, right? High availability replica. So there's something called HADR, that's high availability and disaster recovery. For some of us that into database administration, right? I work with a lot of database, right? So for high availability and disaster recovery, it's just more like if I have data base hosted in two regions, right? I have region A, which is UK South. I have region B, which is UK North, right? And in those my two regions, I have an application that sends data to region A, right? And at the same time, so the application is dealing with directly with region A, which is UK South, right? Region B is UK North, right? But my application, I have like a financial application that is dealing directly with UK South, sending data to UK South real time. And I'm doing what they call like a geo-replica. Geo-replica means I'm replicating those data. You can see here, there's something called geo-replica. Geo-replica means I'm replicating those data in my UK South to my UK North real time, right? Or maybe there can be like a time interval. So the idea is if there's a disaster in UK South, my application automatically just redirects. So the connection string for UK South automatically redirects to UK North. So that the application just keeps sending, but now it's now sending directly to UK North, no longer sending to UK South until UK North is now restored. So now UK North was actually my secondary, while UK South was my primary. But now, as soon as there's a disaster in one of those regions, it changes, right? So that's what we call like geo-replica, right? This is high availability. So high availability means your data must be very high at all time. Disaster recovery is how fast does it take to recover, right? So there's a concept Microsoft tends to use, which is called SLA, right? So SLA is like is given by Microsoft. They take, okay, if there's an issue with a particular resources, you have an SLA of like 99.99%. So it means that it's always going to be up 99.99%, right? So the 0.01% is just like a minute in a whole year, it goes down, right? So those are some of the terminologies. Apologies if I'm going too deep a little bit. So after you have your defense SQL server, your SQL target itself, right? We have what we call like your connectivity, right? So for the connectivity, the advantage is that you already have your own internal connectivity, which you are using Azure Private Link. So these are the connection that's inside of Azure itself, right? So you don't need to start. So that's the beauty. That's why Microsoft is actually pushing more for data watcher, because to set up your SQL Insight, you need a lot of configuration. You need to have your infra team and also your cloud engineer work together to make sure that thing works. But for your database watcher, you can only a database administrator can actually do it, or that's if he has the necessary access control, like role-based access control, you can actually do that, right? If he does not have it, then they'll put him in a dedicated group, right? Resource group itself, right? So after that, then you have your the engine itself, which is your database watcher resource, which collects all the information. It's more like an agent, right? And the advantage is that it's a managed agent, right? So it's like it's being managed by Azure, so it's more like a platform as a service, right? That's PaaS. It's not like an infrastructure as a service, which was done in the previous one, where you have to install your agents inside of your VM, your Ubuntu VM, right? So this one is just platform as a service. That means you don't need a VM being deployed or maintained. So you don't need any deployment or any maintenance. So after that, so the engine now stores data in these two major places. Either it stores data in Azure Data Explorer, or it stores data in Microsoft Fabric's real-time analytics, right? So that's RIT, real-time intelligence in Microsoft Fabrics. And I think right now, Microsoft is just trying to push all the resources into Fabric. So everything you can do, just push to Fabrics more. So for Azure Data Explorer, look at Azure Data Explorer, the same thing like Log Analytics, right? Both of them still uses KQL, that's Crucial Query Language. Why for Fabrics uses, I think it's Event Hub or Event Stream. I've really forgotten the name. I know that they tend to mix the name. I think Azure uses Event Hub. Fabrics uses Event Stream. Yeah, Event Stream, right? So that's where you now do your Event Stream. You now do what you call RTI, real-time intelligence. You now start doing real-time intelligence and the rest. So both of them basically use a primary language, which is called KQL, Crucial Query Language itself, right? And after that, you now have your end result, which is going to KQL to do your reports. You can also use SQL. You can use what's the name, Power BI as your final dashboard. You can use Excel. You can also use Grafana. So for some of us that are more into the DevOps environment, using things like Grafana and Prometheus, right? You can actually build your reports with Grafana, and you have so you don't really need Prometheus in this, because Prometheus basically is what sends the information out, but you already have the information being sent out by the data the database watcher itself. So I think that's fine. So you just have your Grafana to build your reports. Then you have your Azure portal. That's if you want to put your dashboard in Azure portal. So note everything here basically is free to an extent, right? The dashboard is free. Just do pay as you go. That's just basically it. So I think I will stop here and now go to the practical. Any questions so far before I go to the next phase? So I need to stop sharing now, and I will now change. Okay, I think Ayo has a question. So Ayo.
Yeah, to me, yeah, thank you. So I want to ask, that's data washer, right? So is a cloud resource, right, on Azure.
Yeah, it's cloud resource
So
on Azure. Yeah.
so can it be used to monitor what's happening on, say, for example, an SQL Server database that is on-prem? I mean, in terms of resource utilization and all that.
So if it's on-prem directly, so now you know that two different types of on-prem. You can have SQL Server database on plus SQL VM for on-premise, right? You can also now have your normal SQL data server database that is just on-prem. Let me explain. I'll come again. Now in Azure, there are three types of database. You have Azure SQL database, which is on cloud. You have Azure Managed Instance, right? Which is managed instance, also on cloud. You also have what we call SQL Server on a VM, right? So now in Azure, you can actually provision a SQL Server on a VM, which is a virtual environment, which is on cloud, right? So those are the three that Data Watcher can monitor. But if it's just a normal VM that does not have any connection to Data Watcher, I don't think it's possible. Again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So, but if you provision the SQL, so if you provision a SQL Server with Azure, right? So if you are provision Azure SQL Server, right, you have three options. You can provision it on a VM. So if it's on a VM, meaning that Azure provision the infrastructure for you, that's infrastructure as a service, and also provision you the SQL Server inside of it. So now you can easily monitor it using the Data Watcher itself. Okay. So I will start. I'm just trying to. Okay, so some of the things, right? So most times people tend to use on-prem. So if you're using like your normal on-prem, you can check things like your monitor. You can actually monitor some of your resources. Like actually, I don't have anything. This is a local one of my systems. So you can check things like expensive query. You can check some other things you want to check, right? But for now, I'm just going to go to I think VS Code. Is it this one? No. So this, right? So now for VS Code, right? What I want to do, let me just like create a scenario. I'm sending data just to like have data being sent to my database, right? So most times people tend to like use query to like monitor or check some information about that data, right? I don't know if Microsoft has actually is trying to retire Azure Explorer. They're pushing more for using connecting to SQL Server using a VS Code. I don't know if you guys have noticed it. Microsoft are trying to push more for using SQL Server to connect to VS Code. So most times you can just write your query from here, monitor things you want to monitor and say, oh, what is actually running or the rest, right? So most time I tend to monitor my resources. Oh, Nigeria. So I tend to monitor my resources, right? From using query itself, right? I can check expensive query, right? Most times, okay, I don't use the VM itself. I can just check, okay, what are the most expensive query that is running currently on my server itself, right? Check everything here. But most times, what we're going to is actually we're going to Azure portal itself, right? So let's go to Azure portal. So in Azure portal, right? I'll just show you some couple of things we can do, improve our system, improve our processes and the rest, right? So in my Azure portal, I'll go to my which one should I even use? Come in. Okay. So in my Azure portal, right? Let's talk about, so I'm just trying to create like a scenario, right? So now if you look at this, my overview in my Azure SQL database, you see that this is actually a basic tier, right? So it's just like a minimum. I don't want to put too much things because it's just, we're just using for this program, right? So it's just like a minimum. So I don't have all those expensive functionality like elastic jobs and the rest. It's not here, right? So so those data I'm sending currently right now is what is making this spike to be here, because I'm actually sending data to my this thing now. What's the name? To the database, right? So I also have a Python script that sends data to the database for me just to monitor and just create like a scenario that, oh, data is going to a database, oh, there's some spikes and everything. So some of the things we tend to look at when we're dealing with Azure SQL database are, number one is I want to talk about the cost, right? So cost is usually done by the database administrator, right? Or the cloud admin itself, right? Even most times, most organizations, they don't give you access to look at what's happening in the cost, like cost analysis and the rest. You don't get access to that. So now for your monitoring, most times you can just check metrics, right? So one of the things about metrics is it just gives you this view. Okay, what are the things I want to monitor in my database, right? So this is the database, right? What are the things I want to monitor? I can say, okay, what are the different metrics I want to monitor right now? I can see like, oh, blocked by firewall. Okay, I think for this one, I'm using like a default firewall. So meaning that I didn't set any firewall on it. I think I set the firewall IP to 0.0.0 and 225 or something. So now for this, you can see that I have like a CPU percentage, data IO, space available, space used, right? Let's say space used, for instance, right? I can say, okay, this is space used. Currently, what I currently have being used is almost 57.2 MB, right? Because I'm sending data. I can see there's some little bit of spike, right? So I can say, okay, this is what is being used. And this is just I think this is just for the past couple of 24 hours. Let's say for the past 7 days. Let's see. Right, let's see if, okay. I don't really use this. So this is for the past 7 days. Okay, it shouldn't really give much. Let's say for the past 24 hours, for instance. Okay, so now if you look at this now, right, I can see I don't really use this as well. So I can't open production. This is just a webinar and stuff. So I can't really open much production for us. So now if you look at this, right, you can see that, oh, I understand my data and everything. I can say, let me add another extra metrics to this, right? So if I want to add another metrics to this, I can say, okay, let's say data allocated, right? So if I do a comparison between data allocated to data being used, right? So I can say, okay, my data that is being used currently is at 55.8 MB, while the data I've allocated for this particular database is 64 MB. So meaning that it's getting close to it, right? And one of the other things you can do that when you're done, you can actually do like any kind of chart you want to do. Some people prefer doing an area chart, a bar chart, or the rest, right? And what you can now do, you can say, okay, after this, I want to pin this to a dashboard, right? So if you look at this, I have two types of pin here. I have I can either pin to a dashboard, that's what's it call it now? The Azure SQL dashboard, or I can pin to a Grafana itself, right? Or I can send it as send to a workbook itself, right? Send to like a workbook, and I can start building reports from it or writing some codes around it, right? But most times, for people that are very, very comfortable using Grafana, Prometheus, and the rest, right? I would say pin to Grafana, because Grafana is more richer, but I use more of Grafana and open source. That's open source in terms of using it with Docker or using it with EKS or AKS, that's Azure Kubernetes Service or Elastic Kubernetes Service and the rest, right? So for this now, I know that I have my Grafana here, right? I can use Grafana, or I can pin it to a dashboard, right? And one of the cool things about this is you can actually set an alert, right? So alert is just more like if it gets to a particular threshold, right? What should happen? Right, that's the question we ask ourselves. Okay, if data gets to a particular threshold, what should happen? Right, so if I click on an alert, for instance, right, I can say, okay, this is the alert I want, and megabytes. If I say to trash, if it gets to 100, right? It says signal name, okay, allocated space or data being used. So if data being used is greater than in megabytes, is greater than 100 or 80, for instance, 80, right? So I know that my current threshold, my current usage is 58.94 MB. So now as soon as it gets to 80, greater than 80, a notification is being sent out, right? And I can say, oh, how many times do you want to be checking this? I can say, oh, check every 1 minute, check every 5 minutes, check every hour, or just put a log time period, whatever you prefer doing. So this is more like a static approach. You can also do like a dynamic one. I don't think dynamic is allowing me, maybe because I'm using a basic tier. That's why. So you go to next. So the next is like, okay, what are the actions? Why is it giving me warning sign? Oh, conditions. Okay. No, I don't add extra conditions. So let's just go to actions. So if you say, what are the actions? What are the actions you want to do, for instance, right? I can say, okay, I want to send a notification to this particular email, right? So this is like my email, or send to XYZ email. I think you should be able to add multiple emails, right? Does it support semicolon? Interesting. Okay, second email, yeah, okay. So you can actually add multiple emails you want to, or you can send it to a resource manager group. So resource manager group is just more like, they say, group of people. So if sent to that particular resource manager group, so it's sent to multiple people in that group itself, right? So just like saying that the way we do role-based access control in a database, where you give some people read-only privilege, you give some people like read and update privileges, you give some people super user privilege and the rest, right? So those are the kind of things. So now if I say, okay, just to read the data, I put it to the particular group of people, and all those people get those information, right? Then you see I've not done the condition finish though, but so now you can see that. So when you go to the detail now, you can see the different things. You can also have severity, right? So there are different severity you can have, right? So if it's 0, meaning that it's critical, if it is warning, if it is an error, if it's informative, and if it's verbose, right? So most times by default, Microsoft leaves it as informative. So these are some of the things. I think you also have like a tag, right? And you can now do your review and create, but I don't think I didn't set this up well. That's why. So that's for the alert itself, right? That's how you like set up alerts. You can just I think Microsoft has like a better documentation on how to go about this. Another thing you can also look at is so if you create an alert, when you now come to alert, it shows here by default, right? And also note every resources in Microsoft, that every resources in Microsoft has the ability to do monitoring, right? So you can have metrics, logs, and rest. And another cool thing about the monitoring aspect also in Azure SQL database is your log itself, right? So part of the log is you can actually have like some default queries, right? You can use. If I say now this is what I was talking about when I say KQL, right? So you can see these are like SQL, but they're not normal SQL. They're like I think it's called crucial query language. Let me get so for some of you, okay, yeah. So that's crucial query language. It's a powerful read-only language used for query structure or semi-structure, blah, blah, blah. So it was actually developed by Microsoft, right? So it was developed by Microsoft for things like this. And it's actually very, very cool to use. You can also check some documentation around it and how it works, right? So KQL is actually very nice. That if you're working with streaming technology like, so some of the streaming technology that supports KQL, for instance, for Azure, so for some of the streaming technology that supports, I think number one is Stream Analytics. So the Stream Analytics supports it. The Log Analytics. So Stream Analytics, Log Analytics. I think Event Stream in Fabric. So this one is in Fabrics. This supports it. I think something called Data Explorer. So Data Explorer also supports it. So there are multiple resources in Azure, right, that supports it. So yeah, that supports it, right? I won't say so Event Hub. I won't say Event Hub. So Event Hub is more like it's more like Kafka, right? So just like a Kafka that receives, it's just like queues of this thing. So an Event Hub has like a workspace. So let's don't go too deep into all of that, right? So from what I just said, now these are like the major ones, right, that supports so these are the major resources or platforms or services in Azure, right, that supports KQL itself, right? That supports KQL. But if you are very confident on Kafka, yes, we use what we call SQL, right? That's Kafka query language. So they're basically almost the same thing, right? But different use case itself, right? So the beautiful thing about KQL is that it's just like SQL. If you're very conversant with SQL in terms of aggregation and rest, it's the same thing, right? Where you have your you have your where statement, you have your summarize, and summarize is actually a language. It's actually like a function in Power BI. For some of you that use Power BI a lot, right? You know there's something called summarize when you're writing DAX and the rest, right? So this is how it is. I don't think I'll have any output if I run this, for instance, because I don't think I've been using it for so long. Let me check if it will come out. I don't think I have any data for now. This is just like something I just created for this section, for this webinar. So there's no data currently. So, but if you want to use it, you can always click on new, and I think there should be like a default. Yeah. So there's a default. This thing you can see different. You can see weights statistics. You can see average CPU usage. You can see performance troubleshooting. You can see loading of data. So you just click on run. It generates the query for you. Where is the query now? Can't see the query. Okay, yeah. So it generates the query for you, and you can just always run it. But I don't think I have any data for now. So that's that for this log analytics, right? Another thing you can also look into is automatic tuning, right? Yeah, just leave. So automatic tuning itself, right? So most time, because I'm using like a basic, right? So most times it's actually set to on. So on basically means it can actually create an index for you. But this one is more like inherent, right? So now if my table if I create an index in my table, right, for faster querying and the rest, it inherits those properties and the rest. But most times you can actually set it to on or off. You can force plan and the rest. Query performance insights. So these are some other cool features in what's the name now, in Azure SQL database monitoring, where you have things. So you can actually check what query is actually consuming the most. You can see like resource consumption query, long running query, custom, right? So if I say some of the query that's taking the most, right? If I click on this, for instance, this query ID, I'll see the query that's actually consumed. This is actually inserting record into a table. So this is the Python script that I was running just to create like a scenario so that you have some data, right? So it's just this is actually what is running at the moment, right? So this Python script. So it's not something too serious, right? So it just basically tells, okay, this is actually one of the query that is consuming a lot at the moment, right? So this is what the query performance insights, performance recommendation. I don't have any recommendation right now because it's something that I don't really use the database. This backup database, I don't really use it that much. And performance overview, and you get everything you want to use. So in a nutshell, right, one of the advantage Microsoft Azure SQL database have is it makes everything simple, right? Unlike if you're using things like on-prem, right? Let me give you an instance, right? If I have a job that is running for a very long time and I want to monitor it in terms of, is there a failure in my job? So jobs are basically what runs, right, on a SQL server. So in Azure SQL database called Elastic Job, right? One on SQL server on-premise is called like agent job, right? A job agent itself, right? So there are different scenarios you need to understand. So now in an Elastic Job, I can say, okay, if my job runs for a particular period of time, send out a trigger, send out an alert. But if we're doing that locally on premise, you have to now start customizing things like using a stop procedure and use like a timer to run a job at every particular period of time, monitor some jobs. If it runs at more than an exceeded threshold, send out a notification to either Slack or to either Teams or either to an email, and you monitor things like that. So with Azure SQL Database Monitor, it gives you like more like an holistic view, a better way of doing things. So I think that's all. I'll stop sharing my screen. Any question? Any question?
Hello, Tamida.
Hey, how you doing, Samuel?
I'm doing great.
Okay, so any question? I'm done already.
Yes. So thank you, first of all, for the incredible session.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So yes, so my question was with regard to the Gusto query language.
Okay.
Is there a way for you to master the syntax, or how do you go about playing around with the queries?
So I'll be honest, right? You don't really need much. So Microsoft has like a documentation around it, right? So back then, when I was actually learning it, right? Come in. I want to share some. What's the name now? Some resource with you guys, right? Because so this is the I just can be able to share on. So I'll just share with you via LinkedIn or something, right? So for the crucial query language, right? So for crucial query language, I think you can just always learn into Microsoft Learn, right? So one of the tools you can use, I know everybody uses Power BI, right? And we use Microsoft Fabrics, right? So you can just set up what we call like an event stream in what's the name in Fabrics, Microsoft Fabrics. I can be testing out, okay, how can I aggregate a particular data, or how can I do like an average? How can I do? So most times, everything you want to learn is actually on Microsoft Learn, right? So the only problem now is that I don't think everyone has access to Azure, right? But I definitely know everyone has access to Microsoft Fabrics, right? So where you can always learn. Even me when I started learning, I think I learned it using Log Analytics for a project, right? So I used it with Log Analytics back then. And also, I think there's also Copilot, which can always help you to learn Microsoft Copilot. I can always learn from there. So Microsoft Learn has like a very good resource to actually learn how it works, right? But I've long I've actually gone through this, right? So you just check it how it works, check the clusters, check the specific syntax, summarize, export, show, and the rest, right? And you'll be good with that. You'll be good with that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So I guess no question.
Any other question from our attendees?
Okay, tell me that. Sorry, one last question before. So, my question is, like for example, for jobs that you actually that implemented with normal cron job, right? So I just
Okay.
want, for example, you implement, for example, like the Python code you showed us that actually, I mean, we send data to the database and things around that. Say, for example, you implemented it with a cron job and all that. So, I mean, how reliable is that, say, over a long period of time? I mean, with just normal cron job as a scheduler or something like that. So, I just want to ask, how reliable can that, I mean, be for a
So
longer period?
when you say cron job, right? You know that I know cron job is just basically at a particular period of time, right? So now for cron job, what scenario are you talking? Are you talking about the cron job for monitoring or cron job for sending out data or just normal data ingestion or rest?
Yes, just for normal, sending of data, right?
Okay. So now for cron job, it now depends on. So there's something called um. Okay, so there's something called performance, right? So one of the things you have to also understand how to use is how to monitor performance and rest, right? So now for cron job, let me ask one question now. The cron job, will it be inside of a dedicated server, or why are you putting it?
Say on an on-prem server.
An on-prem server, right? So the cron job, is it run with like Docker, or is it run with like task scheduler?
Okay, it's just it's not run inside a Docker container, just inside a Linux VM.
Okay, so that's Linux agent, right? Linux task, this thing.
Yes.
Okay. So now everything boils down to how large the data is. That's one thing, right? So everything boils down to how large. So if I'm processing a very, very large volume of data, right, and I'm using normal Python, it's not advisable, right? Because Python has what you call like Python in internal memories and the rest, right? So most times we tend to opt for using Spark. So now, do you have like Spark installed on your Ubuntu or your Linux VM?
Not yet.
Okay, because what I'm saying so is that I'll give you an example for, I won't mention the name of the fintech, but one of the not the fintech I finished from, like not my previous organization though, but it's one fintech that is very popular in West Africa and also in Nigeria, right? And so for them, this is how the architecture looks like, right? They're heavy on Spark, but a Spark is actually inside of a VM, either Linux or something, right? So because of they know the process millions, because now you don't want to use if you're using like a tool, what I mean like using like a tool, using like Python, using like ADF, those things cost money. You know, it costs money, and most organizations are trying to like, rather we use it, why can't you just do it open source, right? So or do it manually, like do the cron approach, right? So now if it's Python just to move kilobytes or few megabytes of data, it's fine. It's very, very fine. But if you're not talking about millions of records of data, you're processing millions of records of data, you're trying to do things like CDC, we're trying to do things like offset and insert, like that's offset, right? That's insert and merge and the rest, right? I would advise you to have Apache Spark configured in your Linux. So I'm giving this example of this organization, right? I'll mention the name, right? So what they did is, because they know they process high volume of data, right? So what they did was they had the infrastructure guys set up Apache Apache Spark for them in their Linux environment with the highest configuration, so that they gave this such configuration in such a way that it's almost as equivalent to what you have in your Databricks, right? So now what you have in your Databricks, you can say, I'm setting up the Databricks compute to have a very, very high processing capacity. Right now, because of I want to have that similar capability inside of an on-premise, also using a cron job to run it. But this one now they have, like, apart from Spark, they also use Docker also installed in that VM itself, right, to actually orchestrate, like create like a scheduling that runs it. But since you are using Linux timer, right, to run at a particular period of time, it's still fine. It's still fine. So the only thing that you have to put into consideration is, number one is, if it's a very large volume of data, Python alone will not do it, right? I would say use a either use a managed services, which is going to cost. So there's a reason why you guys are using Python. So I would say reach out to your infrastructure team, try and have Apache Apache Spark configured in your particular VM. That it's going to work there. Since it's Linux, you're good to go. It's going to be very, very easy. Unlike if it was a Windows configuration, have Apache Spark configured in it. Tell them that they should give a very strong computer configuration. You can always go online. There are a lot of videos on how to configure Spark. I've actually done it too, but I did mine on Windows, right? How to configure Spark on a VM, right? So that's one. Two now is, how long does it take? That's another thing, right? So one of the things you have to also put into consideration is concurrency, right? If I have this job running at every 5 minutes, right? If the first job, so if I have a job run at every 2 hours interval, for instance, if the first job is still running, it has already exceeded 2 hours and still running, what do you think will happen to this next job that is meant to pick up? It will definitely cause a clash, right? So those are the things you have to put into consideration. That's why you have to do a calculation about the time interval. But if it was what's the name? If it was Microsoft, right? There's some things you can use to, like performance monitoring and some other metrics you can always check and build like a report or something around it, right? So the best bet is you can actually use a cron job on your Linux, having your Linux stacks to send the data. It works fine, but you have to put it into consideration the volume of data and also the capacity of your dedicated VM. So I hope that answers your question, Aya.
Yes. It answers it. Thank you very much, Timida.
Yeah, you're welcome. So any other question?
I guess we don't have any more questions.
Okay. So I think we can close, right?
Yes. So maybe what's your final submission, Temi?
Okay. So I was just say we should keep learning, right? Learn every day, and also one other thing is so before it was be data literate, but now I would say be AI literate now, because AI is now like really becoming very big right now. Even me as a solution architect, I'm also dabbling a lot into AI, just to understand how agent works, how to build agentic AI, agentic RAG, autonomous agents and the rest, how to build agents with MLOps, taking into Kubernetes, making it more, because apart from just building your normal data infrastructure, right? every organization is trying to see how they can use AI in their already existing data set. So that's why you now say, okay, I'm using an AI agent in my database also, and the database can come from different data sources, like, oh, it's coming from a SQL database, or it's coming from a RAG model like data in SharePoint or data in Data Lake Gen 2. I have been like a RAG model. Okay, how can you do things like data governance, right? How can you do things like guardrails? So you're having like a guardrails, your data agents and the rest. So in a nutshell, I would say be data literate, I'll say be AI literate right now, because it's the world right now is just becoming more AI tilted towards AI right now. So I think someone has his hands up. That's God's care or someone. Yeah, God's care.
Yeah, good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
You can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't really concentrate too much because I was in a noisy environment
Oh,
before.
that's fine.
So I couldn't even talk when I had it. So I just got to a place I sleep. Oh, okay.
That's fine.
Mike, let me just, because I can't drag this backward, so I will just ask if the material and the video will be available so that I need to be able to
Yeah,
go back.
I'll provide you a PowerPoint and all the links that I'll share with Samuel. Yeah. But for the
I
record, I
don't know.
don't know.
He
But for
joined
the record,
from Nigeria community on WhatsApp. Is that the same group, right?
no. This is not the same group. So I will I think Samuel, you can drop your YouTube channel. So the person can watch it from there when it's. I don't know if the session is recorded.
Yes, yes. So let me drop
Okay.
our social media handle for X.
Then does that mean that for one to be able to work well on this, one needs to have a good understanding of Python?
I won't say so. So for this now, say it's more of a SQL kind of thing, right? I just want to do something different because I know when I checked, I saw that there was a lot of AI agents webinar that has been done here. So I like, let me just do something totally different. So I would say you need to have you need to know Python definitely, right? So the whole data space now is revolved around two things, Python and SQL, right? So you just have those two fundamentals sorted out and you're good to go. So if you have those two fundamentals, bet you're good to go.
Okay. And will you advise that learning from data camp will be a good
Yeah.
to have this knowledge?
Samuel, I don't know if I'm able to talk about data camp because it's your platform, so I have to be careful not to say things I'm not meant to say. Or do you have a platform that you train? Hello, Samuel?
Yes. Tell me, maybe you can respond to that directly. So for now, we're just focusing on leading these virtual sessions, but it's an opportunity that we can probably consider in future.
Okay, so I just want to say things. If I didn't know if you guys had a training platform. Okay, so yeah, data camp is actually very good. It's well structured and well organized, right? So for Python and SQL, it's very good. I had a manager of mine that learned everything she knows in SQL in data camp, right? So it's very good. So and it has a very structured way of teaching. So data camp I actually had a colleague there that learned everything in Power BI from data camp itself. So it's very, very good. I'll be honest with you. Data camp is good. It's well structured. Yep.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Awesome. So I guess it's time now we wrap up. So again, thank you everyone who has stuck around for the session. Thank you, Tammy, for gracing us with your presence today. And immediately after this, we're going to upload this recording on our social media platforms, X, LinkedIn, and also YouTube. So be sure to check it out. Yes.
Okay.
And
Bye.
have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.